On this podcast, we're going to talk all about simple changes that you can make in your lifestyle that can make huge impacts on your overall health today, tomorrow, and even 10 or 20 years from now. And these are simple changes to your environmental exposures, such as what types of pots and pans to cook with. We're going to talk all about plastic in our food containers, what you should do if a food container says that it's microwave safe. Should you microwave it then? We're going to talk all about different types of detoxing as well. You know, what are juice cleanses? Are they worth it? Do they detox your body? What about infrared saunas? What about red light therapy? How about coffee enemas? We're going to cover a lot of these things with my good friend, Dr. Vivian Chen. She is a physician and a non-toxic living expert. Dr. Vivian Chen is a medical doctor on a mission to teach about one of the biggest silent killers of our time: environmental toxins. She has 15 years of clinical experience as a board certified physician in the UK, and she now lives in California, where she has ditched her prescription pad to instead help people address important root causes of chronic diseases. She is also the co-founder of the leading portable red light therapy company, Loombox. And if you've listened to my podcast, you've listened to me talk about red light therapy, I have mentioned the Loombox before. I'm definitely a fan of it. So we're going to talk all about how you can live a non-toxic life, living a longer, healthier life by making very simple changes to your diet and lifestyle, and maybe some things that you can avoid, like coffee enemas. Let's take a look and let's start this podcast interview with Dr. Vivian Chen. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Vivian.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
So I'd like to start out by asking you about your story. You trained as a traditional allopathic internist and family medicine physician. How did your views on medicine change, and how you practice medicine? How did that change over the span of your career?
Yeah, so I went to medical school in London and I really enjoyed studying the human body and my time at medical school. But everything really came to a screeching halt for me when I had my daughter. She had to be hospitalized when she was just 8 weeks old. And that basically turned my world upside down. And, no, the issue really was that she was hospitalized and nobody could figure out what was wrong with her, including me. So there was me with a lot of medical training behind me, my board certifications, and I couldn't help the one person I wanted to help the most in the world. And that really made me realize that I didn't learn everything I needed to at medical school. And I kind of, at the time, just set about saving her life. I dove into the research, did what I knew best, which is to read scientific papers and try to figure out what was wrong with her. And I figured out that it was cow's milk protein allergy. And I dug out a paper from 1983 that kind of resembled her symptoms and talked about cow's milk protein allergy. And so, that was kind of the turning point for me.
What type of symptoms was she having to the point where you were afraid for her life and survival?
Great question. So I was breastfeeding her and she would arch her back and come off after a few minutes of feeding. And that kind of presentation to any physician or especially pediatrician spells reflux. And so she was put on reflux meds after reflux meds. And she even had a pH study to see whether she had reflux, which was negative. But despite that test being negative, her pediatricians kept saying it was reflux. And then eventually when the meds didn't work, they said that it was a behavioral issue. And, for me as a doctor, I know that babies at that age, they don't have behavioral issues. Their number one instinct is to survive. And so their instinct is to feed. If she wasn't feeding, it was something was blocking her from feeding. And what was happening was that she was allergic to the cow's milk that was in my breast milk. So I was just consuming dairy at the time. I had leaky gut. These large cow's milk proteins were leaking into my breast milk and going into her. And that was triggering an allergic reaction where her gullet became so inflamed that she would be in pain every time she fed. And that's why she came off.
Wow. So it wasn't even that you were giving her formula with cow's milk in it. It's that you were ingesting it yourself and she was getting exposed to those proteins. Is this a common thing?
It is now. It is.
I'm
now.
lactose intolerant, but that's not something I would have ever thought that, oh, well, if I was a baby and I was, I mean, you think human breast milk is the healthiest food for a baby, period.
Right, it normally is. But unfortunately, given our kind of modern day world and our health challenges, chronic diseases rate have gone up significantly. And know how many of us are living with leaky gut. And by the way, that term 10 years ago, when I was trying to figure things out for her, it was poo pooed on by most of my colleagues and medical doctors. They wouldn't, said that thing doesn't exist. Well, now we have a medical term for it called intestinal permeability. But basically, it just meant that, our gut is compromised, our gut barrier is compromised. Things that shouldn't be going into our bloodstream are going to our bloodstream, triggering inflammation, and that can manifest in a number of different ways. Cow's milk protein allergy is actually quite different to lactose intolerance. So, lactose intolerance is like you and I have that because of our Asian genetics, and we can't break down the sugar lactose. But cow's milk protein allergy is actually an allergy, the immune system mounting an attack on the protein in the cow's milk. And that can be either life-threatening or, mild symptoms like a little bit of eczema, brain fog, that kind of thing.
Mhm. So for those of you listening or watching and you're wondering what is leaky gut, just to make a very kind of simple explanation of it for you, essentially the cell lining of our gut is very, very thin, essentially 1-2 cell layers thick. And depending on what your diet is, it can be basically damaged by the food that you're eating. Not physically necessarily. It's not like you eat a certain roughage or something, but the actual foods can create a situation where you get increased intestinal permeability, where substances can actually go from the gut, travel through the gut lining, essentially because it's so thin and it's been compromised by your diet or your health, and then your body then can react to those substances in almost like an autoimmune fashion, can essentially attack those. It increases inflammation, and you develop this immune response to it. We talked about this actually with in a couple of podcasts ago with Dr. Partha Nandi. So if you're really interested in learning a lot about the gut, take a listen to that podcast from just a few weeks ago. So your daughter then is reacting to your breast milk, but it's due to the milk proteins that you are ingesting. So you, I'm assuming, decide to go off of dairy. What happens and how quickly then do you see a change after that?
Well, actually, to save her life, we had to switch her milk because it takes around 3 weeks for the protein to completely come out of my milk. And there just wasn't enough time. So we switched her to Neocate, which is a hypoallergenic dairy free formula. And she improved within a week.
And then this all happens with your child. How then does this lead to you switching how you practice as a physician?
Yeah, so then the second kind of light bulb moment for me was when I took her to her allergist and I asked, well, how come she has this severe food allergy when I don't have a food allergy and neither does my husband? And the allergist said, well, it's one of those things. It just happens. And maybe it's genetics. And, the genetics part really was the trigger for me because, I said that neither my husband nor I had food allergies. So where did that genetics come from exactly? And then when I did the research, I realized that food allergy was becoming epidemic levels in our children. I mean, back in the days when I was in school, I didn't know any kids with peanut allergy. And now in my children's classes, at least one person per class will have some type of food allergy, whether that's milk, eggs, or nuts.
So all of this happens with your daughter. Now you are in California and you are helping people with non-toxic living. How did you transition from being a physician in the UK to now doing this as your primary career?
Yeah, I love that question. So when I dug into the research, looking into why my daughter had this severe allergy, I came across a lot of studies on how environmental toxicants could interfere with our immune system. And there were studies on, for example, the link between mercury and increased immune reactivity and association with allergies. And that was kind of the segue into this rabbit hole into environmental toxins, because when I realized that, I started to look around in our home environment and I realized we were exposed to toxins everywhere in our everyday products. And at first, it was extremely overwhelming because at the time I thought, okay, whatever's on the store shelf must be safe, right? That's what everybody assumes because we think that our government has regulations to protect us. That couldn't be further from the truth because we have now close to 100,000 chemicals in use in the United States registered with the EPA, and very few of them have ever been tested for safety in humans. And they're kind of just grandfathered in, a lot of them from the old days before 1970s. And even the new ones, they're kind of assumed to be safe until proven to be harmful in humans. Now, where I come from, the EU, and I came from the UK, they have a precautionary principle where, they're a lot more careful. Chemicals need to be shown to have some kind of safety before they can be allowed for use in humans. And, this is probably a piece of information that you already know because you have your own personal care product line. But in the United States, we've only banned 11 chemicals for use in cosmetics, whereas in the EU, they've banned 1,200. So this is where, the wake up call really came, that we weren't being protected by our government, and we need to start protecting ourselves.
How do you see now, moving here to the United States from the UK? Do you feel that there is a big difference between the environmental exposures that we get here in the US versus Brits? I mean, and where do you see it most commonly or most notably?
Yeah, huge in our food, number one. So when I first moved here, the same packaged foods that we used to consume in the UK will have different ingredient lists here. So food dyes are a lot more freely allowed. Additives are a lot more freely allowed. The number of ingredients that are banned in the EU would never see it on food ingredient labels, and they're just freely allowed in the US. And, we just talked about personal care products, and there's regulations with, things like industrial production, manufacturing. These regulations all differ. And I just find that the regulations in the US really favor the industries and the companies and not consumers.
There are interesting videos and slideshows that I've seen on social media. And I mean, you always have to, anything you see on social media, you got to take with a grain of salt because you don't know if this has been doctored. But just for an example, if you look at, I think it was Fanta orange soda. And if you look at the color of it in the EU, in Europe, it looks like the color of an orange. But then if you look at Fanta orange soda here in the United States, it's like this bright fake orange color. And the belief is that it's because here in the US, they're allowed to use these dyes that they wouldn't necessarily use in the EU or in the UK. I mean, is that something that you see? And, I've seen some ingredients of different types of food items where, in the EU, it's literally like 5 items. It's like flour, sugar, salt, and then 2 other things. Whereas here, that exact same product in the United States has like 20 different ingredients, and half of them you can't even pronounce.
100%. 100%. And the one thing that shocked me the most, I have to say, was looking at a bottle of ibuprofen, which a friend got, and it was bright pink. Why why do we need to make medications bright pink? I mean, I really don't understand that. I mean, the food industry, I know, put these additives and color flavors in to addict Americans to ultra processed foods, make us buy more of that food, attract children to want those foods. But I don't understand why we need to make our medications pink and attractive too.
How harmful are the dyes specifically? Because just as you mentioned, there are certain foods that the kids that really they do get into. My kids, one of the things that they've loved are Skittles, and I hate Skittles. But I talk about bright colors. I mean, once again, there are different cereals that are just these bright colored cereals and stuff. How much of a problem are the actual dyes being used? Because I think when we think about food and something as a dye, I think about it's like, well, there's a dye there, but it's such a small part of what that food is. It's that tiny covering on top of the food. Is it truly that harmful for us or for our kids?
Yeah, so I mean that's the big debate on social media too, right? You have the two camps, one which is like, no artificial ingredients like dyes, and then the other camp that says no artificial sweeteners and dyes are absolutely fine because they're in such small quantities. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. Like we have studies that show that some of these dyes are linked to hyperactivity and inattention, particularly in children. I think that it also affects adults too. Like if it affects children, it would affect adults. And in the EU, if some coloring is allowed, the safer ones, but if they use these coloring, there is a label on the ingredient list that says consuming these foods may cause inattention and inability to focus and hyperactivity in children, something along those lines. So there's a warning. It's kind of like buying cigarettes and saying this is going to cause lung cancer. So it's acknowledged by the EU regulations and the government in the UK, but these things are still allowed here. And I really feel like this kind of epidemic that we're witnessing in children of inattention, ADHD, is partly caused by our food system.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, definitely. Well, I would like to focus now this podcast on specific swaps that people can do with their household items that are not that difficult, but can make in the end, especially when you accumulate all of these changes, hopefully a big change in a person's overall health and longevity. And the first thing that has been talked about before, and I would love to ask you about it, is cookware. So, what is your main issue with certain types of cookware? So, we're talking pots and pans.
Yeah, and I love starting in the kitchen because I feel like that's where a lot of these exposures are in. And like you said just now, it's not about going out there and swapping everything overnight after you listen to this podcast. It's about just being aware and then taking one step at a time. So I just kind of want to emphasize that. But in terms of cookware, there's two main types of cookware that I have concerns about, which is nonstick and aluminum. So let's talk about nonstick first. So nonstick cookware is usually coated with a layer that kind of repels water, and that's why the food doesn't stick. And the way it's usually made is from PFAS chemicals. So a lot of people have heard of PFAS in the news lately. They're the kind of forever chemicals. These are chemicals that once made take hundreds of years to break down. So they persist in our environment, and that's why they're called forever chemicals. Have you seen that movie Dark Waters?
I have not yet.
Okay, but if anyone hasn't seen it, I highly recommend it, especially if you have a husband or a partner who is very resistant and doesn't believe in kind of toxic chemicals. That movie is great, but it's kind of like it is about DuPont and how they manufactured all these non-stick forever chemicals, released it into the environment, poisoned the residents around their factories, and then try to hide it. So we actually have a huge mounting body of research linking these forever chemicals, which by the way is a group of, I think now 10,000 different chemicals. It's a family of different chemicals, but they all have very similar chemical structures and they cause kind of similar impacts in our bodies and our health. We have research showing that they're linked to impaired immune response, thyroid conditions, certain cancers like testicular, kidney, and fertility issues. And even if you get pregnant, preterm birth, high cholesterol can have an effect on our liver and weight gain, insulin resistance, so many different things. And in fact, two out of the 10,000 chemicals were voluntarily phased out in the US. So these are PFOA and PFOS. So oftentimes when you go to buy cookware, you'll see the label PFOA and PFOS free. And that's kind of like a fake marketing term because these chemicals were voluntarily phased out anyway. So most cookware actually don't contain them. It's kind of like a redundant statement just to confuse consumers into thinking, oh, these are forever chemicals free. And that's probably the biggest takeaway I want to say, which is don't fall for that statement. That doesn't mean that it wasn't made with forever chemicals. You actually need to look for PFAS free, so PFAS free. So that indicates the whole family of these chemicals. And a lot of people go to Costco and they kind of say, oh, it's PFOA, PFOS free, so it must be safe, and they buy it. And actually, when it's heated, there's evidence showing that related chemicals are released into the food.
So, what are your preferences when you're looking at cookware? Because I know there's different kinds. There's ceramic, there's stainless steel. What are your preferences, I guess, in order? And even glass. Some people are using glass, I guess.
Definitely. So I love going back to my roots, and my grandmother cooked with a cast iron pan and carbon steel woks. I love those. Just be careful, carbon steel woks, some of them are now coated with nonstick. You want to look for a non-coated but seasoned carbon steel. And of course, with your cast iron, you need to season it. And, a
It can be
truly
a pain to take care of.
it can be, although, it takes time to get there. There are there's a brand, I'm an affiliate for them. I'm not, I don't own the company, but it's called Field, and they season pretty well. So right out the box, they are almost nonstick. So that's the one I use, and because I've tried to season cast iron a couple of times, and it just made the house extremely stinky and didn't work.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
invested in that. And once you get that, as long as you're not, taking that seasoning off by washing with soap and things like that, it should just last. I've had mine for 5 years now and it's still nonstick.
What if somebody doesn't want to go the cast iron route? Then what would be the next choice of yours?
I would say stainless steel would be the next one. So stainless steel, if you kind of know how to use it, can also be nonstick. So there's kind of holes in the stainless steel, which when you heat it up, expand and the holes seal. And once the holes seal, it becomes nonstick. So the trick with stainless steel is if you want to fry eggs on them, you can. You just have to heat it up for a good 1 or 2 minutes. Make sure the holes are sealed, and then you add your oil, and then you add your egg, and it should be nonstick. And then there are these ceramic pans out there too that are kind of the newer nonstick. They're kind of made from sand, silicon dioxide, which is the coating. Now, my issue with them, now I think that they're safer probably than the forever chemicals, but my issue is that that layer is quite thin and it actually becomes sticky very easily, especially if you put it in the dishwasher. So a lot of my followers have used these pans and tell me that after 6 months, they have to throw it away. Also, underneath that the silicone layer is aluminum. And that's the kind of number 2 cookware that I want to kind of talk about, because studies have shown that aluminum cookware do leach into the food because you're at high temperatures, especially with acidic food. It encourages the leaching of aluminum from cookware into the food. And there was a study that showed that people who use aluminum cookware had twice the amount of aluminum in their blood. And in that same sample of blood where they measured a higher level of aluminum, they showed increased oxidative stress, which is kind of rust that eventually causes inflammation, which is what we want to avoid. So yeah, those would be the 2 types of
So, mentioning aluminum foil then is something that I know you're not a fan of. Can you explain what your issues are with aluminum foil?
sure. And I know this is going to get a lot of hate because people do love the aluminum foil.
Oh, my followers don't hate you. Don't project hate at all. But
Okay,
I tell you,
great.
we use aluminum foil in my house a decent amount, and so yeah, I would love to hear this because yeah.
I think that, okay, so let's start with the fact that we know that aluminum also leaches from foil into your food. Now, the concern comes with contact time. So let's say you put your food on aluminum for 5 minutes and cook it and you take it out. I really don't think that's a big deal. Yeah, there is some contact time, but it's short. Studies show that if you cook your food on aluminum, it can increase the amount in the food by 2 to 4 times. Now, that's not going to put you over the concern limit. What may, though, is if you start marinating that food in foil. So I see that happen a lot, right? If you want to grill meat or steak, a lot of people prep ahead of time, they marinate, but they're wrapping the meat in aluminum. Now, that is a concern because studies have shown that if you marinate your meat in aluminum or with aluminum wrapping it, you can increase the amount of aluminum in that food by up to 40 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and then if you're eating it multiple times, and if you're, let's say, taking an antacid that also contains aluminum, now you're going to be over that safe limit. We do have detox organs. So I would say don't panic. A small amount of aluminum, our body should be able to handle and detoxify and get rid of. It's when you exceed that safe level, or if you have impaired detox organs, for example, if you have slight renal impairment, so your kidneys are not working as well to get rid of these aluminum, now that aluminum can start to accumulate in the body.
What would be an alternative then if you don't want, if you do want to marinate your meat? And I know some people when they grill, they'll take their chicken, they'll put a bunch of veggies in it, wrap it in aluminum foil, put that on the grill for a while. What can they do then as an alternative? Or is there just not really a good alternative to aluminum foil?
I think that, I mean, for me to marinate, I would marinate in glass because that's that's pretty safe. And if you really need to understand it, if you don't use aluminum, it really makes your grill dirty. It's really hard to clean. So if you must use it, just reduce contact time and don't put anything acidic. Right. So if you want to put lemon juice with your chicken or meat, for example, or your salmon, cook that piece of salmon first and then squeeze the lemon on afterwards because acidity increases leaching as well. So you want to just, be mindful of contact time. Don't have the food be in contact with aluminum for too long. Try not to put anything acidic into contact. And I think everybody should, as long as you're not using it 3-4 times a day, I don't see it as a huge concern. But, with toxicity, it's really all about your overall exposure. I don't focus on just one single thing because that one thing may not do anything for one person, but have a huge impact on the other person.
And I think it's important to realize that we're talking about accumulation of exposures. I know that there are a lot of people and even physicians who will say, well, no, these are, all of this stuff, it's safe, it's been tested, it's safe. But a lot of things, what we see is a lot of these, let's say, whether you're talking about the forever chemicals, whether you're talking about the different dyes in food or the different additives and preservatives, is that they may be tested to be safe in isolation. But we're talking about complete toxic load, toxic load meaning all of the different toxins that you're exposed to throughout your environment, throughout your day. They don't do testing for that. It's like they test one at a time. And yes, if you are living in a bubble and all you're exposed to is the aluminum from the aluminum foil, then you're probably going to be just fine. If you're living in a bubble and you're cooking on nonstick cookware, you'd be fine with that most likely. It's the accumulation that we want to try to reduce of your toxic burden. So that being said, now let's switch
On that
gears.
point,
Yeah,
I
sure.
actually have something to say because a lot of people kind of stick to that safe limit, hanging on to it as gospel truth. And we just have newer and newer research showing that safe limits are lower and lower for every class of these chemicals. For example, lead. And then BPA, just a month ago, there was a presentation done at the American Diabetes Association showing that the current EPA safe limit for BPA, which is 50 micrograms per kilogram per day, that dose administered to adults over 5 days led to increased insulin resistance. So is that dose safe? That was the question that was being brought up. So we may need to review that safe dose. And by the way, the safe dose in the EU is 0.2 nanograms per kilogram per day, 250,000 times lower in the EU compared to the US.
All right, well, let's switch gears to something that I know is a concern of yours. Plastics. So one thing that I did take from you, this was an interesting quote from your Instagram. And if you don't follow Dr. Vivian Chen on Instagram, you definitely should. She's under Plateful Health. Plastic cutting boards. Using a plastic cutting board regularly can expose you to up to 50 grams of microplastics per year. This is 12 credit cards worth of microplastic just by using a plastic cutting board. We have got 3 plastic cutting boards in my house, and then we have a wooden cutting board. And the wooden one, we just don't have tons of space, and we use cutting boards all the time. So it's often easy to use a plastic cutting board, but this is really concerning.
Yeah, your wife must really love me.
I haven't brought this up with her yet, so we'll see. I was just reading about this last night, so that I haven't even let her know about this, but it's like, wow.
Yeah, so this was a study published earlier this year, and it was a very small study, okay, of 5 people using plastic cutting boards under normal cutting conditions. And then they kind of collected the dust and the particles left on the board and analyzed the amount. Now, this is a range, right? The range is from something small, like 1 gram, up to that 50 gram. So the range is very big, and they found that if you were cutting hard foods like carrots, that was where kind of the higher numbers used to be. Oh, sorry, the higher numbers were shown in the study. So I would say if you have a plastic cutting board, and I know a lot of people don't like to cut meat, for example, on wood. So if you want to hold on to your plastic cutting board, use it just for meat. Cut everything else like your veggies on a wood cutting board where, the bacterial contamination concern is not so high with veggies. And definitely have one board for meat and one board for your veggies. That makes sense. There was a study that did show that wooden cutting boards are actually naturally more antimicrobial. The issue with wood is that if it's not dried properly, that's when bacteria can harbor and start to grow. So I understand that there are concerns with wood, but if you actually cleaned it properly, let it dry properly. I've been using a wooden cutting board for years and years, and touch wood, not had any issues. And the other thing I want to say about plastic cutting board is definitely don't put it into your dishwasher.
Oh, no. Oh, we do that all the time.
Yeah. So there was a study looking at plastic cups, the reusable plastic bottles people use take their water in, which showed that if you put those cups in a dishwasher, it increased the amount of microplastic and chemicals like phthalates in the water after you wash it in the dishwasher. Now, it could be your dishwasher pods, we don't know, but yeah, I would hand wash the cutting boards if you can.
Interesting. So, staying on the topic of plastic, also another thing I found really interesting is that you shared some information where if you get a plastic container and you can look at a number in a triangle on the bottom to determine whether that plastic is safe to use or not. And it's very simple. You look for 1, 2, 4, 5. 1, 2, 4, 5 in the plastic triangle. It is in general safer. What are the concerns you have if, let's say, you have a plastic container that you are using for your food and it has a number 3 or a number 6 or something like that?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to plastic, there's bad, better, and worse. That's how I kind of think of
So there's no good.
it. Yes. So the bad ones you want to avoid are the 3, 6, and 7, right? So 3 is PVC. So that can leach phthalates and vinyl chloride, which are carcinogens, into your food. So definitely want to avoid those. I don't see many food containers made from 3, I have to say. 6, I do see. So 6 is those foam looking polystyrene cups that a lot of people put their coffee into. So polystyrene can leach styrene, again, a carcinogen into your drink. So try to avoid those foam cups if you can. And again, once or twice, it really is not going to make a dent in your health. It's about regular use. And then 7 is a category called miscellaneous. So that includes polycarbonate, so baby bottles, those hard plastic bottles that usually polycarbonate. The concern there is bisphenols. So a lot of people look at those, it will say BPA free, and they think, oh, wow, okay, that's great. It's safe then. Unfortunately, BPA free just means that alternative bisphenols have been used. So like BPF, BPS, both of these have been studied in children to cause lower IQ, being associated. Sorry, I shouldn't say cause. The causation hasn't been shown. It has been associated.
Correlated with, associated
with lower IQ, particularly in boys, inattention, and even autistic spectrum disorder. So BPA free doesn't mean it's safe. I would try to switch to glass or stainless steel instead.
And then one of the things that you recommend is not to put plastic in the dishwasher, which we just covered, whether it's a cutting board or any type of plastic. Is it that you heat it and then that becomes an issue, or why else would that be a problem?
Yeah, I think it's heating really starts to cause that plastic to degrade. Now, plastic can be made from, I think, something like 10,000 different chemicals. And again, most of these haven't been tested to be safe in humans. And the main ones that I'm worried about are a class of chemicals called endocrine disruptors. So back to BPA again, or bisphenols and phthalates. So these are the two that have been shown the most to kind of leach out of plastics, but also the plastic can break down into micro and nanoparticles. So these are super tiny fragments of plastic. We don't fully know what the impact is yet on our health, but they've been in petri dish studies shown to cause inflammation. And then we can talk about endocrine disruptors more if you want. But yeah, those are the main concerns.
And then you do recommend too, even if something says it's microwave safe, if it's a plastic, because we get takeout, and then the actual container says microwave safe. That also you shouldn't trust and put it in your microwave.
Yeah, microwave safe just means it won't melt in your microwave. It doesn't mean that it's safe for your health. So that's the distinction I want to make. There was a study published earlier this year that looked at microwaving baby food containers. So these were plastic containers used for baby food, typically have, in the triangle on the bottom, you'll see numbers 2, 4, or 5. Those, according to what you just said and what I say, are the safer plastic, right?
Yes, 1, 2, 4, 5, safer.
Yes. So polypropylene, polyethylene, these are the kind of safer, thought to be safer plastics because they don't release the carcinogens we talked about earlier. But unfortunately, just 3 minutes of microwaving these food containers released billions of nano and microplastic particles into the food. And that's a particular concern if you're feeding babies. Yeah. So I would recommend if you want to microwave your food, transfer it into glass or ceramic plate would be better.
So we've talked about some things to avoid, some shifts to make, changes to make. I think it's so important, as you have always done, is to be realistic. And you mentioned too, you go on vacation and you will drink out of plastic water bottles on vacation, but maybe you're not going to refill that water bottle. You're not going to leave it in your car overnight and have it get heated up to a high temperature and then drink out of it the next day. But at the same time, we also understand that we live in a culture where we're surrounded by plastic, and sometimes it's hard to 100% avoid it. So don't go crazy with it, don't lose sleep over it, but making these tiny changes can really eventually help to lower your overall toxic burden, especially over the years, and so important with your children. Let's shift gears now and talk a little bit about actual detoxing, and now things that you can do actively to get your body healthier, not necessarily avoiding bad stuff, but what can you do to actually improve it? So first of all, what do you think about detoxing in general? Some doctors will say that detoxing is unnecessary, that you've got your liver, you've got your kidneys, they will naturally detox. What is a detox anyway? Don't bother doing it. Just try to eat healthy foods and you're fine. What do you say to that?
Yeah, so I agree that we have natural detox organs, but unfortunately, they are overwhelmed with the amount that's in the environment, the amount that we're exposed to on a daily basis. And, phthalates and BPA, for example, they should come out of our bodies very quickly. The half life is 24 to 48 hours, but we have fat biopsies and tissue biopsies that show that these are now depositing into our tissues. So when the body's detox kind of capacity is exceeded, now these toxins don't have anywhere to go. They start to deposit into our major organs. So we found nanoplastics, for example, in the brain. Yeah. So, and there was a study earlier this year that showed that microplastic in the major arteries led to or was associated with a 4.5 times increased risk of heart attack, stroke, and dying from any causes. So definitely that we have detox organs. And I love this conversation because it's about, on the one hand, doing the best that we can to try and reduce. I never say avoid, you can't avoid. Just do your best to reduce. And then let's try and support our detox organs too, to try and get rid of what we cannot avoid, because we can't avoid them 100%. So yeah, we can talk about the detox organs a little bit more if you want.
Well, what are some of your favorite ways to actually detox? Things that you can tell our listeners that they can do today that may help with these detox pathways.
Yeah, so let's start with food. Number one would be to increase the amount of cruciferous vegetables that you eat. So, cruciferous vegetables are things like broccoli, bok choy, daikon. These vegetables have contain a compound called sulforaphane, which actually upregulates our liver detoxification processes. So, they help us detoxify. They also upregulate anti inflammatory pathways. And since these toxins cause increased inflammation, that's also desirable. So it has kind of like a two-pronged mechanism. One of my favorites is broccoli sprouts. Broccoli sprouts by weight has 2 to 50 times more sulforaphane, the active compound that help us detox, than actual grown broccoli. So broccoli sprouts is one of my favorites. And then we want to think about the alliums. So onion, garlic. And you know what? I think you'll like this. So one of my most underrated detox food, if there's such a thing, is kimchi.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so kimchi has cruciferous vegetables in it. It has alliums. And not only that, but kimchi kind of specimens that have been taken out of kimchi, the live bacteria have been shown to help the breakdown of BPA in the gut. So you're breaking down BPA so it's not being absorbed and adding to your toxic burden. So kimchi is actually one of my favorite foods that I try to eat every day.
That's a good thing. Love kimchi.
Yeah, exactly.
So, eating certain types of foods can help with the detoxing. How about different actions, activities that can help with it as well?
Oh, yeah. So, exercise is so important. So, exercise has been shown to boost glutathione production. So, glutathione is kind of our body's natural master detoxifier. It binds onto toxins and shuttle it out of our bodies. And so, boosting that naturally with exercise is great. Exercise also make us sweat, and sweat has been shown to contain these contaminants like BPA, sometimes more at higher concentrations than what's found in urine. So, I don't know if we can say that it's a major detox organ, but it definitely can play a part.
What are your thoughts with saunas, whether infrared or steam saunas?
I love sauna. So not only for kind of sweat inducing potentially detox capabilities, but it's been shown in studies over and over again to help with heart health and now cognitive health. So I do it for those reasons as well. But yeah, I'm a fan, huge fan of sauna.
And do you do more infrared or are you more steam, or what are your thoughts with the
Yeah,
benefits of infrared?
so steam, I think you just have to be mindful what kind of water is in the steam. Are you inhaling a ton of contaminants in that water, right? Chlorine. We know vaporize. So are you inhaling chlorine in the steam thinking you're detoxing? So that's my question. I generally do infrared just because it's more comfortable. I can sweat a ton at much lower temperatures. Although I have to say, most of the studies on cardiovascular and cognitive benefits are using the traditional Swedish, the dry heat saunas.
How about juice detoxes? There are people who sell juice detoxes. People go on it and they swear by them. What are your thoughts on juice detoxes?
Yeah, in general, I'm just not into detoxes or, a product or a thing that you can buy to detox because detoxing is something our bodies do 24/7. I think I'm a big believer that we can just use everyday foods and lifestyle to support those organs and make them work better, rather than pushing these detoxes. And most of the time, it's either, let's say, kind of like a liver support supplement, or it's a juice cleanse, or it's some kind of a binder. And they all have issues and can cause side effects because, for example, if you're pushing your liver to detox with these supplements, but your gut is not optimized. And let's say you're pooping once a week. Whatever your liver has done to detox and break down these toxins can't come out. So you're not actually detoxing. We've got to fix the gut first, and then you can take liver supporting supplements. Binders are the same. I see people jump on this, charcoal or whatever binder they can find, thinking, oh, yeah, I'm detoxing. Unfortunately, if you're constipated and you add a binder, you're going to be more constipated. And now the toxins are just literally sitting in your colon. And these toxins have been shown to be reabsorbed. So they can be reabsorbed back into your blood circulation, and you're not actually doing any detox at all. And my issue with juice cleanse, which you asked about specifically, is it's, for me, I think a lot of people get benefits because they're not eating their usual kind of inflammatory ultra processed food diet. They're just drinking juices, which are, again, number one, hydration, great for the body. Number two, lots of easily absorbed vitamins, great. But don't confuse that with detoxing. You're reducing the amount of toxins coming into your body, probably, but you're not actually getting rid of toxins, because detoxification requires amino acids and lots of different nutrients that you're not going to get from a juice cleanse. So a lot of people get headaches or side effects, brain fogged, when they do these juice cleanses, and they think it's a detox reaction. I think that those are actually signs that your detox organs are overwhelmed and not coping.
Oh, interesting. Then I'm assuming you're not a fan of coffee enemas.
Definitely not. I think that the gut should go one way and one way only.
Okay.
That's my opinion. And there's just no science to back it up. There are no clinical trials to show it does anything that people claim it does. And in fact, there's several case studies that show that it can cause inflammation or infection, even death. So I'm not a big fan of those.
What I am a fan of is you've got a product called the Loombox. And the Loombox is a red light device. It's a tabletop. You can hold it. You can put it in front of your face. You can put it on your chest. Tell me how you became involved as a co-creator, I guess, of the Loombox, or how did that all come about with the Loombox?
Yeah, it's usually things that I do come out of caring for my family. So this time it's caring for my dad, who was bedbound from a muscular condition that he couldn't, recover from. He's in his 70s, so recovery is slower. So 3 years ago, I had to fly back to the UK to take care of him. He was actually misdiagnosed as having sciatica. So that's a whole nother story. But anyway, it was a muscular condition. It was slow to recover. I had read that red light therapy could help with muscular recovery and tissue healing. I had one at the time that I was using for my face because I had read studies on how it can support collagen production, reduce wrinkles and fine lines on the skin. So I was using one, a portable one at the time. I took that back home. He was using it because I was reading the studies on how much irradiance and energy was required to penetrate into muscle. And he had to use this device for an hour a day. So, but anyway, he actually got better. And after about 10 days, he was up walking. He was hobbling, but he was walking. And then after 3 weeks, he was walking normally. So that really blew my mind because, of course, I did put him on an anti-inflammatory diet and helped him with things like turmeric and things like that. So there's other things involved. I'm not going to say it's just red light therapy, but I do believe it played a huge part because his diet is not actually that bad anyway. And after that, I thought, okay, well, this device is so weak that he needed 1 hour to get the right dose. What if I made something that was powerful enough that people only needed 10 to 15 minutes to get the same effect? I couldn't find one at the, when I was researching the market. And so that's why I decided to make my own. The other issues with these red light devices is that almost none of them are tested in a third-party lab for irradiance. They're kind of just measured with a handheld light meter, which is notoriously inaccurate. So I actually third-party tested Loombox to make sure it had the irradiance I wanted.
And so the Loombox is something that I know I have promoted before. I'm a big fan of red light therapy. I think it's great. You just talked about how it's great for muscular healing with discomfort. And, obviously for me, it's using it as an anti-aging treatment because we do know that red light therapy and studies have shown can help to increase the collagen, the elastin in your skin. People find that it can help reduce inflammation of the skin. And the belief is that it works by powering your mitochondria to essentially produce more ATP. And so more and more people are using it. And I'm definitely definitely a big fan of it. We'll have a link to the Loombox on the caption of this podcast. So we'd definitely encourage you to take a peek at it. So I've really enjoyed our discussion today. I'm going to go home and talk to my wife about some of the changes that we're going to make, such as not putting our plastic cutting board in the dishwasher, which we do all the time. And I really want to thank you for your time. Once again, I think we need to emphasize, there's a lot of stuff that we talked about here, and, don't feel overwhelmed. Just making these simple changes, like not microwaving the microwave safe plastic. That's a simple change that I think we can all make. Not putting our plastic cutting boards in the dishwasher is a simple change my wife can definitely make for us. And don't be overwhelmed. It's these small changes that can make a big difference in the long haul.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much for having me and opening up this conversation.
Thank you, Vivian. So you can find Vivian at platefulhealth.com. She also has a Substack. Tell me real quick about this Substack that you have.
Oh, Substack is just kind of my more in-depth, nuanced deep dives into topics which we can't do on social media, where, you need to make content in 10
studies
seconds.
And all that in there.
Right, exactly. So that's what Substack is for, people who like to read and deep dive.
Yeah, so definitely take a look. She's at platefulhealth.com. She's on Instagram. She's got great information on Instagram. A lot of the stuff that we went over today, and there's so many more things that she covers. I really want you to take a peek that we didn't have time to cover today, like how do you find rice that's low in arsenic? That's on her Instagram. Fast fashion and cheap clothing, how the plastic in the clothes can actually be potentially harmful to you, and what she recommends doing instead. Natural options for bug repellent, cash register receipts, that those can even potentially be endocrine disrupting. So much great information from Dr. Vivian Chen. Would recommend that you check out Plateful Health, platefulhealth.substack.com. Check out the Loombox, which is her great red light device. I want to thank you so much for coming in today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So my name is Dr. Anthony Youn. This is the Dr. Youn Show. If you've been enjoying this podcast, if you could leave us a rating or review on iTunes, on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, I would definitely appreciate it. Otherwise, as always, I'll sign off by letting you know to eat real food, use clean skincare, and auto-juvenate before you operate.